as we consider those regulations. We don't have to wait to see what the impacts of data centers are in our community. In fact, we can just look to neighboring areas. In Virginia, data center development increased utility bills by up to 290%. That is a threefold increase. And in Wyoming, just a month ago, a rush data center construction contaminated the community's water supply. This isn't sustainable, and we won't wait for a crisis to happen here, which is why today we are pursuing a full ban on large-scale data centers in Austin. This especially matters in Texas. Not long ago, state leaders stood alongside tech billionaires to declare Texas the epicenter of AI development. Then they handed out billions of dollars to the industry with tax exemptions to prove it. The result? We now have enough data centers to power 1.6 million Texan homes. It's 1.6 million homes. Simply put, the choice shouldn't be between big tech's bottom line and our right to clean water, our right to clean air, and our right to simply keep the lights on. That is why we are fighting for this ban. But the consequences don't just start and end within our city limits. Our water supply doesn't just belong to Austin. Our power grid doesn't exist in isolation. A data center anywhere in the region will still strain the very resources and the utility rates that we fight to protect. That is why we must also coordinate with our neighboring counties and ensure that we're not just pushing the problem next door. The people of Austin have been very clear. The industry must be held accountable, and the time to act is now. With that, I'll toss it over to my colleague, Councilmember Jose Velasquez.
Good morning. I am Councilmember Jose Velasquez. Over the past few months, members of our community have taken time out of their lives, away, out of their jobs and away from their families to come to City Hall and tell us how they felt about large-scale data centers in Austin. We are listening. As my colleagues and I said in our message board post yesterday, we cannot and we will not support the presence of hyperscale data centers within the city. Major data centers bring too many unknown and undefined environmental and social impacts. And my concern is that this would again inequitably affect low-income and historically underserved communities that have faced the realities of environmental injustice for far too long in Austin, Texas. Thank you.
Hello, I am Councilmember Ryan Alter, and as discussed today, both at the work session and here, I think it is pretty clear that large-scale data centers do not belong in Austin. I have heard from resident after resident who said, we don't want them to come here and make our electricity more expensive. We don't want them to come here and suck us dry when we're already in drought. We don't want them here in Austin, and so that's what we're doing. We are taking action to make sure that our community is protected from the exploitation of these large data centers. As part of our conversation today, what I really wanted to hone in on is make sure that we are updating our rules to match what we're seeing on the ground. You know, our land development code is 40 years old, and when it was written, there was no contemplation or imagination of a data center. You know, we squeeze these into some category that they really don't belong. And so I want to make sure that we prohibit data centers from all of our existing categories, our existing zones, and use the tool that we have, which is the Land Development Code zoning, in order to say we're going to create a new process that if any data center ever wants to come here, they have to receive public approval, they have to go before the council, receive council approval, and they have to tell us exactly what their impact is going to be, and we will hold those protections in place and make sure that if you're a small-scale research facility like we have at the university or what hospitals do, there is a place for that. But if you're talking about these large-scale data centers, there's not. Thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Councilmember Siegel.
Good morning, y'all. I'm really happy to join with my colleagues to express our commitment to banning large-scale data centers in the city of Austin. You know, the massive proliferation of data centers across Texas and across the country is really a fundamental injustice of this moment in history. when we are jacking up electric rates and water rates, when we are driving up land prices to purchase these facilities, when we are negatively impacting people's quality of life with noise and vibrations and light and other negative impacts, who are we doing this for? Fundamentally, this is to benefit the billionaires, the very few. It's not to benefit humans. It's not to benefit our environment. And the federal government should be doing something about this. The state government should be doing about this. And we need a national movement to make sure that happens. But until we see action at higher levels of government, our city and these council members are committed to taking action locally to protect our neighborhoods, to protect our quality of life, to make sure these outside interests don't ruin what we have here in Austin. Thanks, Joe. Councilmember Kutch.
Thank you, Councilmember Siegel. The rapid growth of hyperscale data centers is alarming, particularly because of the enormous demands these facilities can place on our energy and water resources. As Austin continues to grow, we have a responsibility to protect those resources, not just for residents today, but for residents of future generations here in Austin. Item 61 starts the process by developing strong, proactive policies and regulations so that Austin is prepared to address the impacts of hyperscale data centers before they become an even greater challenge. And I look forward to working with my colleagues to strengthen this item and ensure we are taking a thoughtful, comprehensive approach to protecting our community and our response. This work is part of our broader commitment to mitigating climate change, advancing equity, and making sure Austin remains a sustainable and living place for generations to come. And with that, since I am the last council number 9, we'll open the floor up for questions.
Just for absolute clarity, are we talking about banning hyperscale or large-scale data centers?
So right now, we've initiated a process that we'll vote on Thursday that will create definitions in the city code. But at that time, we get to define what large-scale or hyperscale means. I'll speak for myself that currently I'm relatively comfortable with the existing data centers we have at universities, at hospitals, at banks that are in the range of 1 to 20 megawatts in terms of how much electricity they use. But I don't think we need to allow much bigger than that in our community.
Could you explain why this is going to be a process and you can't just, write an ordinance banning the centers on Thursday?
Sure. So here, I can touch on that. So the city has the power of zoning. That is one of our most powerful tools. But in order to implement any kind of zoning change, saying what can or cannot be used on a particular piece of land, you have to first initiate that process, which is where we are today. And then you have to have public hearings to go through and let the public give their feedback on what those proposals are. We can't just go straight to the finish line and say we're going to absolutely change this zone or this category. We have to follow the state rules in place.
And if item 61 passes on Thursday, how soon could we see an ordinance to vote on potentially?
I think they meant it come back in spring of 27. So as was mentioned, this initiates the process and how we can regulate data centers in our city. We know that we have 10 data centers across Austin. In my district, in District 2, we have 7 of those. So certainly, Austin's not alone in taking action. We've seen other cities take action. City of San Marcos recently passed a ban on large-scale data centers. And so for us here in Austin, we want to make sure that we are doing our part in fighting back from the data center proliferation that we're seeing happening across Texas and across our nation.
I think one of the officials today mentioned there were some large-scale data centers that were interested in opening within Austin city limits. Do you think that spring 27 timeline will be fast enough to kind of get ahead of any of those opening potentially?
I mean, certainly I would love for it to be faster than that, but that is what city staff is currently telling us the soonest they could come back with an ordinance pending the direction and guidance that my colleagues and I will bring forward via amendments on Thursday. So certainly in regards to particular development activity, we're not quite sure how it'll affect, but that's why us having this public conversation matters, because we want to send a very clear message of what being a good neighbor to our residents looks like, and also to ensure that we don't have large-scale data centers in our city.
Just the one final thing that was discussed today is in this interim period, we are doing everything we can to freeze any kind of activity, and anybody who wants to come here not having those applications make it all the way through the process so that these rules can catch up just to where we are today.
But again, that's not an actual official freeze or moratorium. That's more just an unofficial one.
Well, that is what the way our system works is we give instruction to management. Management then on the administrative side takes those actions. So we have given today that instruction. Is pretty clear that there is widespread support for that. And then the mayor also talked about providing the official direction on that on Thursday, so that there will be an official directive to staff to not move forward on these.
And how does large users' use of electricity drive up costs for residential users?
You want to take that? Or
Well, generally speaking, the more demands on Austin energy generation capacity there are, the higher our rates go. And especially when you're talking about the prospect of some of these data centers using hundreds of megawatts, that would represent 10% of our load or more. And so we absolutely want to bar those types of entities from locating within the city, because that would put tremendous pressure on all of the ratepayers to pay for new infrastructure and absorb those additional costs.
It sounds like y'all are fairly united on this, and you've mentioned public feedback from your constituents about not wanting these hyperscale facilities. Hypothetically, if there was one that was viewed as a good neighbor that a certain community did want in Austin, does this process allow for that in the future?
Well, I mean, Councilmember Siegel, you've mentioned some really good uses between banks and hospital systems. Certainly, data centers are an important part of powering our day-to-day life, right? From our phones to streaming Netflix. I mean, they are part of our lives, and so certainly that's really why we want to ensure we have a process that doesn't just ignore the fact that data centers exist. There's a good way for them to exist, and doesn't also address the proliferation, the increase of the construction coming online. So it has to be a really good balance. I have 7 of them in my district, and I was chatting with my team the other day, and I asked, have we ever received a complaint from a constituent on one of our data centers? And we haven't yet to date. And I think because they are smaller scale, so they're less than 20 megawatts. But the large scale data centers that we're talking about are 75 megawatts and above. And so, which is another reason why we want to take action on the large ones.
okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for being here.